Hi everyone, and welcome to my guide for the Hanging Arrow Unhallowed Essence Demon Hunter in Season 21. This is pretty much a new build because Hanging Arrow was never really worth running in the first place, but now we have the upgraded quiver, the 9th series satchel, and this makes Hanging Arrow extremely strong. So I've already showcased this a bit during the PTR, and I think this build will go up to like 135 plus in solo, and it's also a okay Rift Guardian killer for foreman, especially for speedruns. And it has the big advantage that you can bring the new Odyssey's End, which has a 150% additive damage boost to your whole party. So this is kind of the main argument to run this setup in Foreman if you want to do some high-end boss killing. It is weaker than something like Crusader and Impale, and it's weaker by quite a bit. So I expect that kill times will be around twice as long or so, but you give this a huge damage buff during the Rift, and no other Rift Guardian killer can compete with that in terms of how much you bring to the party. So we'll see how well this will actually be used. I assume, especially early on, that this could be a very nice way to kind of like boost your way up a few tiers, because typically killing a Rift Guardian in like a minute or two longer is not really such a big deal if you actually get like double damage or so during the Rift, or close to double damage because of all the buffs you bring. This is a setup you can run next season, and it's quite strong, so it's definitely up there with the other top Demon Hunter builds. Maybe a tiny bit weaker than something like GR125 or so, but definitely up there. If you don't like the strafe playstyle, you can just go for this, and it's definitely a valid choice. So let's go over the setup here. First we have the solo variation, then we have the Rift Guardian killer, and there's also a few variations, especially for solo, that I want to show you. But first of all, the basics. We have the Unhallowed Essence set. And this one works with discipline, so you need to have a high amount of discipline, and you get a big damage multiplier as a result on a 6-piece bonus. So each point is 350%, and you can have up to 86 discipline if you have 12 on the chest, the crossbow, and the quiver. And this way you can boost damage a bit higher. On top of that, you have preparation, giving you another 20 maximum. And you have to know that the 6-piece bonus scales of your current discipline. So you want to make sure that it's always really high, because else you do no damage. Other than that, we have some updated items. The Hunter's Wrath, for example. This is still the old version, but it has a higher damage value now on the new season. And also the 9th series satchel. Again, the other 3 panel is not updated yet. So this gives you a guaranteed pierce and also 600% extra damage. So this is a huge damage buff, and kind of enabling the entire setup in the first place. And the thing is that with this 100% chance to pierce, you can use the Hanging Arrow, Devouring Arrow, similar to the GR125, and each pierce increases the damage by 70%. And this is extremely strong, and when you have a lot of monsters stacked up very tightly, you pierce like 10, 20, 30 times or more, and the damage goes through the roof. So this is kind of what you're going for. You want big pulls and just have the arrow go through everything, and it will just destroy. The arrow disappears after a certain distance traveled, which is 120 yards, so it doesn't go on infinitely. But you generally want to make sure that you're standing quite close, and then you have like a big pull, and you just blast into it. And you can see that for example, you can SOJO in procs. I actually wear SOJO in this setup here, simply because stacking up monsters so tightly more often is such a huge damage boost that this is probably one of the better choices here. As for the rest of the setup, we have Focus and Restraint. So you can go multi-shot with the Windshield rune to give you some slow and the 8% crit buff, and otherwise just for the Restraint buff, it's really nice. So you can easily keep it up that way. We have Dawn equipped because you want to have permanent vengeance. So with the Dawn and the Paragons and the Diamond and the Helm, you need 3 items to get permanent vengeance with 37% sheet cooldown. So make sure that at least you have it on shoulders, and then 2 more items, and this will usually cover it. If you have the SOJO equipped, it always comes with cooldown anyway, so this is already the 2nd item, and then just like 1 more somewhere. And otherwise you just take like area damage, maybe physical damage on the rings, and Hanging Arrow where you can, and this is about it, besides the typical stats like crit and cold damage. For the skills, obviously we have the Hanging Arrow, we have multi-shot here, Vengeance, you want the Vault for mobility, Preparation, Invigoration for the extra damage boost on the 6-piece bonus, and the Companion. You can swap out the Companion, you can go with something like Smooth Screen, for example. You can even go Shadow Power if you like, because this is a generator build, so you keep refilling your discipline quite fast because of the 2-piece set bonus. So whenever you're shooting at 1 discipline, so it actually, you can spend a little bit and don't have to worry too much. but then be mindful about it, especially when you have to do long skips. You might run out of discipline, and then can press preparation, but it might not be enough, so your damage might be a bit weaker in those situations. For the cube, we need Depth Diggers. This is 100% multiplicative boost, really, really strong. Same here with the Simplicity Strength, giving you a lot of healing, plus it's the biggest damage boost you can get here. And otherwise you have stuff like Baneful Stricken and Baneful Trapped. And otherwise here in the cube we have Echoing Fury. This is pretty nice because you can get a nice damage boost once you start killing the small stuff. So typically you make a pull and then you start shooting, and the first arrow is going to kill something, and then afterwards you have 5 stacks and you just keep blasting really fast until you decide that the pull is done and you want to move on. So this is pretty nice. And otherwise, Convention of Elements, you want to play around this because it's a very strong damage boost, and especially with this piercing mechanic from the Hanging Arrow, you want to have one really strong arrow when you shoot into the pole after getting like an SJ1 proc or so, and you want that to be super juiced with Convention as well. Otherwise, we have a few different setups here as well. For example, you can go Endless Walk with a double generator setup, so you can do an Entangling Shot with Heavy Burden, giving you a 4-second slow, and combined with the new Odyssey's End, which as I mentioned is 150% damage now, you can self-buff everything with Entangling Shot, and then you just blast when Convention comes, and then you keep refreshing the Entangling Shot, and like this you can do a lot of damage. That's a little bit tricky because first of all, whenever you start making a new pull, you have to shoot entangles. Every entangle is 2 targets, and when there's like a big pool of like 30 targets, you have to do a lot of generator casts to get them all in the entangle chain. You don't have to hit them specifically, but it works if you just shoot into one target, and it will like kind of spread out to everything around, but you have to refresh it every 4 seconds, and this can be a little bit difficult to do. But yeah, if you want to go for this, you can include something like Elusive Ring, for example, and go Endless Walk instead of focusing on Restraint, because you don't have the multi-shot anymore. Definitely also a deep viable choice here if you like to have it a little bit more slow pace, a little bit like bigger bursts of damage. It's hard to say for me which is the setup that you really want to do for like the highest push possible, but they're all quite close. And here we have the last one, which is Focus on Restraint and Squirts, and we have Fortress Ballista in the cube instead of Echoing Fury. I really like the setup because you can get a nice damage boost here, especially in those safe scenarios and on Rift Guardian and so on. When you dodge a little bit, you will not lose squirts, and Fortress Ballista gives you the shield to keep it up most of the time unless you're fighting some nasty elites, especially towards the higher end when you are well geared and you have some toughness and so on. But still keep in mind, you're not super tanky, you can't keep it up forever, especially when there's a lot of stuff going on. What you could do to make it a little bit easier is to replace Convention here with Elusive Ring again, and then again you can keep up the squirts a bit easier. That also gives you a nice damage boost. For the Foreman setup, it's also quite similar to the Odyssey's setup. So we have Endless Walk again, we have the double generator, we have the bow in the cube, and otherwise this is extremely close to this solo variation. And you just want to make sure that you get the Entangling Shot up on everything. So during the Rift, most of the time, for example, if you're playing with Witch Doctor, you will not really get close to the Witch Doctor's damage. So don't really try, just entangle everything for him. And like this, you can make sure that you apply the buff to everything and boost your trash clear DPS by a lot. So you're kind of like a third support in those runs. And then on the Rift Guardian, you just have to make sure you shoot this one Entangling Shot every 4 seconds. Otherwise, hold down Hanging Arrow and you will kill the boss eventually. So this is pretty straightforward. And you can buff your damage a bit with stuff like Signal Out, for example, and Steady Aim. And this will help you out a bit in Foreman as well. But as I mentioned, the Rift Guardian killing setup is a little bit weaker than what you're used to from Crusader and Impale Demon Hunter. And probably not going to be used for the high-end like rank 1 pushers, but especially early in the season when everyone is really weak, I believe that this setup is really nice to go to the higher tiers quite comfortably because of this huge damage buff to your trash clear DPS. And as for the gameplay, I mentioned most of it already, so it's quite straightforward most of the time. You just have to Hanging Arrow. If you have Focus and Restraint, make sure you keep it up every 5 seconds. Otherwise, you just shoot Hanging Arrows all the time, try to dodge around a little bit, and make sure that, for example, when you have squirts, you have to be a little more careful, make sure that you dodge arrows from monsters and maybe some elite affixes and so on. and that's about it. One thing you have to be careful about is the UE 4-piece bonus that gives you a 60% damage bonus and damage reduction, and it refreshes whenever you're far away from enemies. It's 10 yards distance, and sometimes this can be really hard to keep up, especially in 4-man, because there's like 100 monsters on the screen and something will always follow you around. So sometimes you have to vault out a few times, like 2 or 3 times, and then come back in. And actually, because of this, I think that taking tactical advantage as a passive is also not really the worst choice. Even though when you do like slow-paced runs, you can get your 4-piece bonus up rather easily with this, and then you just go back into the pull or something. So this is something I wanted to mention. And yeah, the rest just comes down to making the right pulls, making the right calls. So you definitely want to skip small pulls. You don't really want to finish elites and so on. Most of the damage is done in the big pulls when you get something like SHO and procs, and you can definitely notice the difference because of those pierces that you get from Devouring Arrow. This is where all the magic happens, and you really have to go for those big pulls. And you can, because you're quite mobile. You have vault, you have discipline, you have preparation, and you can just keep going through the rift really fast anyway. Make a nice trash pool and mostly ignore elites. But yeah, in those good and big maps, you can definitely kill them anyway. Just kite them along, and then eventually you finish them off. Anyway, I hope you liked this video here, and it's gonna help you to build your own Demon Hunter next season. If you don't like the Gaudy Age of the Strafe, this is definitely a good choice here. So I want to get this out, and hope you like this video. So see you guys next time.